I really liked this second passage. I think it made a really interesting argument. You don't have to like it in order to get all the questions right, but it helps. So, lucky me, I guess, is all I'm saying. Because I liked it. The argument is that there's too much focus on the appearance of wrongdoing, and instead of messing with that whole business, just make the judges lay out their reasoning. If they have to recuse themselves, they better have a reason for it. And if they don't recuse themselves, fine. Lay out the legal reasoning behind your decision in the case. And in that way, and as the last paragraph shows, it doesn't matter whether you've got some bias in your heart. If you have strong legal reasoning, even if you have some implicit motive, it's the legal reasoning that matters. And in that way, you stop focusing on appearances and you start focusing on logic. All right, question 8, a weakness of the current rules. And the current rules in line 15, they don't give any idea of whose perspective to take or how to interpret the facts. B, they fail to specify whose perspective is relevant. Or, we could have seen an answer choice that said they fail to say how to interpret the facts. And it's always going to be that way, right? Just what the text says. For question 9, how do we know that the purpose of the second paragraph is to state the author's objections? And we know that because that's what the author did, right? You go through the paragraph and the author says the rules provide vague guidance at best. They don't give any idea whose perspective to take. They don't tell you how to interpret the facts. This is a mistake. It is just a list of all the reasons that the current regime of dealing with recusals is flawed. And that's what it looks like when a paragraph is stating objections. For number 10, how do we know that the author regards that legal principle as an established principle of law? The way we know it is that she just refers to it without trying to explain it or justify it or argue in favor of it or against it. That's what tacit agreement is. That is what unspoken support looks like, when you just use it as a part of your argument without ever having to explain or justify or strengthen or argue for a thing. So when she says under the law, blah, 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 she's saying this is the way it is. It is, therefore, an established principle of law. For number 11, the author says in line 22 that focusing on appearances may cause sources of actual bias to be overlooked. Such statutes can fail to eliminate actual bias. And it's, often when you're just asked to fetch information, it is that simple. Just go back to the passage and fetch it. For number 12, how do we know that any faulty reasoning would be detected? And this is important, in principle, which is a different thing from saying it will be detected, right? In principle, in theory at least, faulty reasoning can be detected. And we know that the author thinks this for certain because she says in line 46, as long as a knowledgeable observer cannot find any fault with the legal reasoning. So when she sets up the condition that if somebody can't find fault, then it's okay, then that rests upon the principle that it's possible to find fault with legal reasoning. And that's how you know that the author thinks that, at least in principle, faulty reasoning can be discovered. 13 is very straightforward. You probably don't need any help with it. When the author says real reasoning, she's talking about the undetected bias, the underlying illicit motive. And an example of that would be some example of bias, and that's why answer choice C is right. Personal animus against the defendant certainly provides an unseen, undetected maybe, source of bias. For 14, I feel like answer choice E would be kind of the clear choice just based on our understanding of what this whole passage is about, that the current method of dealing with recusals is bad. But if we want to get really systematic about it, the author makes it clear that it's possible that recusals are based on the appearance of bias without there being any actual bias when she says in line 32, we should eliminate disqualification motions alleging bias, whether actual or apparent, making it clear that there is the possibility of apparent bias that is not, in fact, actual bias. And then, of course, she says explicitly in the second paragraph that if you're focusing on the appearances, you can let real undetected bias in. So it's a failure on both counts. And that finishes off the second passage.